Have you ever met someone who, with just a few quiet words, not trying, not boasting, not raising their voice, makes you immediately sense, this person is not ordinary? There's something about them that makes you instinctively go silent, straighten your posture, and offer them something no one can demand: silent respect. They don't need to be cleverly performative. They don't need to appear knowledgeable. They simply speak, and every word they choose cuts straight to the essence. We live in an age where words are cheap, easily spoken, rarely earned. Everyone talks. Everyone wants to be heard. But how many speak with such depth that others truly want to listen? The most formidable individuals don't manipulate. They don't need to convince you. They simply speak at the right moment, and silence around them naturally falls into order. Because their words are not just language, they are the residue of a character forged from within. In this video, we won't talk about magic phrases or communication tricks. We'll explore 6 simple words, but when spoken by someone with depth, they instantly reveal their true character and quietly command respect. These are words anyone can say, but only a rare few can speak with honesty. They are tests. They are mirrors. They are the silent divide between those who live by impulse and those who live by virtue. 1. Sorry. When you have the courage to admit you're wrong, there is a strange kind of power hidden in what seem to be the 2 weakest words. I'm sorry. It is not a surrender, nor an escape ticket from mistakes. It is the rare moment when a person looks directly at themselves, strips away the protective shell, and speaks the truth the ego has long tried to conceal. When someone says, "I was wrong," without blaming, without adding "but," without trying to soften the situation, it is the moment they step out of the performance of pride. It's no longer a battle to prove they're right, but a journey to live honestly. In this world where everyone rushes to be right, the one who dares to admit they're wrong is the one who silently earns respect. We were raised in a culture that worships perfection. Mistakes are treated as failure, and apologies are misunderstood as weakness. People learn to defend before they learn to face. They learn to blame before they learn to take responsibility. When someone points out our flaws, the first instinct is not to receive it, is to react. We counterattack, justify, redirect the story, doing everything to protect an image of ourselves flawless, always right, always in control. But then comes a time, if we're brave enough to look deep, we realize the effort to always be right is nothing more than the fear of being seen as we truly are. And that very fear makes us lose the most trustworthy part of ourselves, our honesty. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If something is right, embrace it. If something is wrong, admit it." He didn't say that to teach submission, but to remind us that integrity begins with not lying to ourselves. When we say, "I'm sorry," we're not only apologizing to others, but to ourselves for not acting in accordance with the values we claim to believe in. It's a promise that from this moment on, we will live with more truth, more clarity, and more discipline toward our own soul. A sincere apology does not demand forgiveness. It only requires the courage to face the truth without seeking an escape. I once witnessed a moment like that in a company meeting. A female manager presented incorrect data in front of dozens, including the board of directors. The tension was palpable. Everyone waited to see how she'd react, justify, deflect, or move on. But she paused, took a deep breath, and said, "I'm sorry. This number is incorrect. I didn't double-check it. I'll stop my presentation here and verify immediately." The room fell silent. Some looked uncomfortable, a few surprised. But when the meeting ended, no one talked about her mistake. They talked about how she handled it. Because in a world terrified of losing face, the willingness to take responsibility is a quiet act of noble pride. The power of an apology does not lie in grammar, but in the energy behind it. A fake apology is just verbal cover. A real one arises from awakening. Someone who truly knows how to apologize doesn't just say the words, they feel the weight of their mistake. They don't apologize to end the argument, they apologize to open a new truth, where honesty matters more than saving face. That's why when someone says, "I was wrong," without fear, you immediately sense a stillness in them, something unshakable. They're not speaking to be forgiven. They're speaking to free themselves from the prison of justification that has held them for too long. Epictetus taught, "Acknowledging ignorance is the beginning of wisdom." And he's right. A sincere apology is the first light in the journey of self-awareness. When you dare to say, "I was wrong," you stop lying to yourself that you're always the victim, that it's always the situation or someone else to blame. You shift from a passive stance to an active one. You no longer wait for the world to fix the wrong, you start the repair from within. At that moment, the apology becomes more than moral action. It becomes a spiritual exercise where a person learns to stand upright in truth, not bow in fear. But the hardest part about apologizing is not saying it, it's living it. Because apologizing without change is just another form of deception. Words only carry weight when behavior follows. Someone who has hurt others, if they truly grasp the weight of that action, won't repeat it. Not because they fear punishment, but because they fear losing the integrity within themselves. Admitting you're wrong doesn't make you smaller. It makes you more human, a person who knows they're not perfect, but who is clear-eyed enough not to hide it behind the mask of pride. In Stoic philosophy, an apology is not just a moral gesture, it's evidence of emotional mastery. The angry don't apologize. The weak apologize out of fear. But those with inner strength apologize because they know. Mistakes don't ruin honor, only lies do. When they admit their faults, they prove that honesty is stronger than ego and truth more important than image. They understand something simple that many never learn. That a mistake does not diminish your value, but evading it destroys your character. There are relationships that break not because the mistakes were too big, but because no one could say, "I'm sorry." There are people who spend a lifetime in emotional distance, not because love faded, but because pride kept them from admitting fault. It's ironic that a short phrase could save a relationship, yet is harder to say than "I love you." Because to say "I'm sorry" is to give up your right to be right, and to some, that's more sacred than happiness itself. The Stoics never taught us to bow to others. They taught us to bow to the truth. When we apologize, We don't lower ourselves, we lower our ego so the soul can rise. In a world where everyone wants to win with words, the one who says, "I was wrong," wins in silence. Because they have conquered the most dangerous opponent, their own pride. An apology doesn't need to be long. It doesn't need to be poetic. It only needs to be real. And when it is, it doesn't just soothe the one who hears, it purifies the one who speaks. There is nothing more powerful than a person who can admit they were wrong, because from that moment they no longer fear the truth. And a person who no longer fears the truth is someone you can never underestimate. 2. Know when you set boundaries without apology. Since childhood, we were taught to be polite, to please others, to say yes, so we wouldn't be seen as rude or ungrateful. But few ever taught us the opposite, that sometimes knowing how to say no is the highest form of self-respect. Because living without boundaries is no different from handing others the key to walk in and out of your life at will. No is not a rejection of others. It is a declaration of self. It doesn't sever connection, it preserves dignity. And the most frightening thing isn't being disliked for saying no, but being quietly ashamed of yourself for not daring to. There's a kind of courage that's quiet, unarmored, and doesn't protest. It's when you calmly reject something that goes against your values, without explanation, without apology. Not because you're cold, but because you've stopped performing in someone else's story. Most of us are used to saying yes, just to avoid conflict, to please, to be accepted. But the price of that pleasantness is the quiet disintegration of the self. When you say yes, while your inner voice screams no, you're no longer living honestly. You're handing over control of your emotions and values to someone else. I once witnessed a striking moment at a company party. A group urged a colleague to stay and drink more, despite him having an important presentation the next morning. They laughed, pressured, called him antisocial, too serious, even mocked him for being above it all. Amid the jokes and passing glasses, he simply smiled and said, "No, I'm heading home. Hope you all have a great night." No excuses, no nervous glances, no sign of hesitation. He left, leaving behind a slight sense of deflation. But that's exactly what made him admirable. Because when the crowd chose to follow each other, he chose to follow himself. In Stoic thought, nothing matters more than knowing what is yours and what is not. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us and some are not." Other people's disappointment, anger, or hurt because you drew a boundary that is not your responsibility. What you can control is living in alignment with what you believe is right and maintaining consistency between thought, word, and deed. Those who say no are not selfish. They simply understand that if you don't protect your own time, energy, and emotions, no one else will do it for you. Saying no doesn't mean you're against others. It means you're protecting what's sacred within you. No is how you tell the world, "I know who I am, I know what matters, and I don't need your approval to live truthfully." To say no calmly, without harshness, without raising your voice, is the sign of an inner strength that's been forged. It doesn't seek recognition. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply stands firm. Boundaries aren't fences to shut people out. They are markers that keep connection healthy. Those who never say no eventually feel depleted. They become dumping grounds for others' expectations, places others feel entitled to occupy at any time. And one day, they no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. They no longer know what's real and what's just performance. But those who set limits, they're not closing the door on the world. They're simply selective about what gets to come in. Refusing doesn't mean you're rude. It means you're honest. You don't make promises you know you can't keep. You don't agree just to make someone happy for a moment, only to resent them silently later. You don't accept invitations, appointments, or offers just because you're afraid of disappointing someone. Because you understand, kindness doesn't mean always giving in. True kindness sometimes looks like a quiet, steady shake of the head. The Stoics never taught you to become isolated. They taught you to know yourself so deeply that you no longer need to live under others' expectations. And that begins with one word: no. That word may disappoint others, but it will stop you from betraying yourself. It may surprise people, but it will let you sleep in peace. And in the end, real respect doesn't come from always agreeing, but from having the strength to say no when it matters. A person who can say no is not someone who lacks empathy. They simply understand that other people's emotions should never be built upon the silent sacrifice of their own. And when you meet someone like that, someone who can say no without fearing they'll lose affection, someone who doesn't apologize for having boundaries, you know you're in the presence of a character that's not easily shaken. Someone like that doesn't need to raise their voice. Their presence alone makes others adjust their posture. And the silence that follows their no is the space where self-respect remains untouched. 3. I understand. When you listen without taking over the story, there are moments when a person doesn't need advice, doesn't need comparison, doesn't need to be pulled out of their pain. They just need to be fully heard. Without interruption, without someone trying to take over the narrative. And sometimes, a simple phrase like, I understand, when spoken at the right time, in the right way, can become the kindest thing you'll ever offer another person. Because in this world, few things are as precious as feeling truly seen by someone, not judged, not fixed, not forced into comfort, just simply accepted as you are. Listening is not a skill. It is a choice. A choice to set aside the need to speak about yourself, to resist the urge to appear wise, to let go of the temptation to give advice, and to stay with another person in the delicate space of empathy. A person who can listen deeply is no longer the center of every story. They're not waiting for their turn to respond. They don't redirect attention to themselves. They just remain silent, fully present, and witness like a still body of water, deep enough to reflect another's emotions without stirring the surface. I once shared a life-altering experience with a friend. At that moment, I didn't need anyone to tell me what to do. I didn't want hollow encouragement, and I certainly didn't need my pain compared to someone else's. But almost everyone reacted the same way. That happened to me too. Stay strong. At least you. Each well-meaning word made me feel more distant, as if my pain had become a subplot in their story. Only one person after listening looked at me and said, "That must be so heavy to carry alone." No advice, no follow-up story. But that sentence made me cry, not from pain, but because for the first time, I no longer felt alone. When you say, "I understand," you're saying something profound. I honor your inner world. I'm not here to change it. I'm just here to witness it with you. That phrase is a silent promise. I won't turn your story into a stage for my emotions. I won't twist your experience into a life lesson. I just want you to know I see you. Stoic philosophy is not the cold detachment many assume it to be. On the contrary, it teaches us to understand others' emotions without being pulled into their storm. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Understand others as if you were them, but stay composed as if you were only observing." This isn't indifference, it is disciplined compassion. When you're aware enough not to interfere, that's when you truly become someone who makes others feel safe to open up. True listening requires no credentials, no technique. It only demands full presence, and that's why it's so rare. Because full presence is the hardest thing in an age of screens, of knee-jerk interruptions, of hidden pride in giving advice. In a world where everyone wants to be heard, the one who dares to stay silent and listen not to respond, but to understand is someone who holds a very rare power. The power to make others feel worthy of existing exactly as they are, without needing to be fixed. The person who can say, "I understand," isn't necessarily more experienced. They've just learned how to put their ego aside. They don't need to validate themselves with stories. They don't need to be the hero by offering a solution. They understand that, in many situations, what people need most is not the right advice, but the steady presence of someone who doesn't walk away halfway through the pain. When you meet someone like that who listens without interrupting, who stays with your emotions without discomfort, who doesn't react impulsively but understands consciously, you feel healed without needing to be fixed. Because understanding is not agreement, nor is it blind acceptance. Understanding is when we give others the space to exist without defense, when we allow them to be vulnerable without shame, when we put our ego down, not because we're small, but because we're strong enough to do so. And when you learn to say, "I understand," with your whole heart, not to pacify, not to avoid, not to claim moral ground, but just to be present, that's when you begin to form the kind of deep, lasting, and rare connection that few ever experience. Because the most trustworthy person is not the one who always has the answers, but the one who is silent enough to make you feel you don't have to perform to be loved. And sometimes, just one "I understand" is enough for someone to believe they no longer have to carry it alone. 4. Actually, when you speak the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, there's a kind of courage that's quiet, doesn't earn applause, doesn't make you the center of attention, but forms the very foundation of personal dignity. The courage to speak the truth, even when it makes the room tense, even when it unsettles the listener, even when it risks being misunderstood or labeled as argumentative. The word "actually," when spoken not to be right, but to preserve the accuracy of the world, is one of the purest expressions of inner character. When someone has the courage to say "actually," to correct something false, even if it's small, even when there's no benefit to themselves, it reveals more than intelligence, it reveals a deep loyalty to reality. They're not saying it to show off knowledge. They're not trying to embarrass or shut someone down. They simply cannot allow falsehood to spread because to them, truth is more valuable than comfort. These are the people who understand when small lies go unchallenged, greater collapse is only a matter of time. I was once in a meeting where a colleague presented incorrect data. It wasn't a serious error, but if left uncorrected, it would have affected the team's decisions. Most people stayed silent, not because they didn't notice, but because they didn't want to make things awkward. I could have done the same, but I looked at that colleague and gently said, "Actually, that number was updated last week, it's changed slightly." Not harsh, not confrontational, but that small correction shifted the meeting's direction. No one felt attacked, but everyone felt respected because the truth had been preserved. Stoicism doesn't teach us to become unpleasant in the name of integrity. It teaches us to know when to stay silent and when to speak not out of ego, but out of devotion to truth. Epictetus once said, "Truth and honesty are the foundation of courage." A truthful person isn't someone who exposes everything they are, someone who masters the balance between what must be said and how it must be said. And someone who can say, "Actually," with calm, without preaching or sarcasm, is someone using composure to correct the world without needing to win an argument. Don't confuse "actually" with stubborn criticism or a desire to assert superiority. How you deliver the truth determines whether you're heard or dismissed. A wise and respectful person never uses truth as a hammer. They use it as light to illuminate the path, then step aside so others may walk it. Truth, when spoken with humility, doesn't harm, it awakens. And that awakening, though uncomfortable at first, is always a noble gift. This world isn't short on intelligence. It's short on people willing to speak the truth when no one asks for it, and no one will applaud. Most people choose convenience over honesty. They smile, nod, and let falsehoods persist as part of polite habit. But a person with deep morality refuses that path. They know that to earn real respect, you must first dare to stand with the truth, even if that choice makes you momentarily alone. Because enduring brief discomfort is better than living in long-term complicity. When you meet someone like that who says, "Actually," not to win, not to lecture, but simply to keep the truth from being distorted, you're standing before one of the most honorable forms of character. They don't need to shout to prove their worth. They don't need power to be heard. All they need is one accurate sentence and calm presence for everyone to understand. This is someone who won't stay silent when truth is being forgotten. The person who tells the truth, even when it's not easy to hear, gives you confidence that they won't say what you want to hear, they'll say what you need to hear. They won't betray you with false comfort. They won't let you stay mistaken just to avoid conflict. And that is why they're trustworthy. Not because they're always right, but because when they're unsure, they stay silent. When they're wrong, they correct themselves. And when they see truth being twisted, they speak without fear of being disliked, without the need to be liked. Integrity is not a garment you simply wear. It is forged every time you choose difficulty over ease, confrontation over avoidance, truth over evasion. And every time you say "actually" to keep truth upright, you lay another brick in the citadel of your own dignity. No one needs to see it. No one needs to praise it, but you'll know. You just chose to stand with what will never betray you, the truth. And that is why, even if your words make others uncomfortable in the moment, you will always earn their respect in the long run. 5. Help when you offer your hand without being asked. There are hands extended not because they were asked, not because of a favor owed, not to earn praise, but simply because someone saw you struggling, and they couldn't turn away as if it didn't exist. It's an instinctive response, unplanned, unperformed, that comes from a rare kind of person. Someone who sees what the rest of the world no longer notices. When someone says, "Can I help you with that?" before you even speak, you're standing in front of a character who has trained themselves beyond selfish impulse and habitual indifference. We live in an age where people are consumed with themselves. Eyes fixed on screens, ears filled with noise, minds racing with unfinished to-do lists. We see each other less, and stop for each other even less. So when someone reaches out to help, not because you begged, but because you hadn't yet realized you needed it, they have preserved within themselves a sensitivity to human struggle, a quality on the verge of extinction. They need no reason to do good. Your vulnerable presence was already reason enough. Once, I witnessed a man quietly bending down to help an elderly woman gather scattered papers blown across a parking lot. No one asked, no one watched, no one filmed. And yet, that small act shifted the atmosphere around him, not because it was a nice gesture, but because it reminded us of something we've lost: awareness of other people's burdens. He didn't ask, "What's in it for me?" He simply saw someone in distress, and that was reason enough to act. That is disciplined kindness, a form of decency that requires no applause. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "We are made for cooperation, not to turn our backs on one another. Every act of support is in alignment with nature." In Stoic philosophy, helping others is not a gift from the strong. It's a duty among beings sharing a chaotic world. The person who steps in to help without being called upon understands this. Their existence is not separate from the people around them. They help not because morality commands it, but because they simply cannot not help. Indifference suffocates them more than any external pressure ever could. You can recognize someone with inner depth not by how they talk about ideals, but by how they act when no one is watching. These people possess sharp eyes not just to observe, but to perceive. They're the ones who step aside so you can walk faster before you even realize you're lagging. They're the ones who retrieve your wind-blown papers before your hand even moves. They don't ask, "What do you need?" because they've already sensed what you haven't yet noticed. The impulse to help doesn't come from having spare time or being in the mood. It comes from a principle. If you can ease someone's struggle, you should. Not to feel noble, not to be thanked, but because if you don't, something inside you will feel incomplete. People who live this way don't fear being worn out. They know that kindness doesn't weaken you, it makes you real. And to be real is the rarest thing in a world of daily performance. There's a strange kind of power in those who pay quiet attention to others' hidden struggles. They don't need to say much. They don't need to prove anything. They just need to show up, notice, and reach out. Even if you never repay them, even if they never bring it up again. In that moment, they've given you something no money can buy, the feeling that you don't have to face this alone. And in the darkest seasons of a person's life, that feeling may be the only light strong enough to keep them standing. Stoicism teaches us, help is how you practice virtue, not through lectures on goodness, but through tangible action. When you offer someone help unprompted, you're reminding yourself, I still control who I become. In a world that numbs the human heart, to remain tender is true strength. The person who offers help before you can speak is someone who understands the power of an action that expects no return. They live as if each day is a chance to prove they haven't been swallowed by indifference. And if you want to be like them, start with the smallest things. Observe more carefully, slow your steps, listen deeper, and don't wait for someone to fall before you reach out. Because sometimes, just a glance of awareness is already an invisible hand that keeps someone from collapsing into silence. 6. Congratulations. When you're truly happy for someone without feeling threatened, there is a kind of gaze you never forget, not because it's dazzling, but because it makes you feel that your success is not a burden to anyone. It's the gaze of someone genuinely happy that something good has happened to you. No concealment, no comparison, no masked sarcasm in polite applause. They look at you as if you are proof that goodness is real, and they don't feel any smaller because it didn't happen to them. People like that are rare, because most don't know what to do with another's success except quietly compare, keep score, or feel like they're falling behind. And that's why congratulations, a word that seems easy to say, becomes a test of character depth. This world isn't short on congratulations, but is severely lacking in real joy for others. You can sense it in every stiff hug, every "that's great" said from the throat, but empty in the eyes. Some will smile at you, then quietly ask themselves, why not me? Some will respond by telling you a story about something they once did, kind of like that, just to pull the spotlight back to themselves. And some, when you share good news, will suddenly fall silent as if you've done something wrong. They don't say anything negative, but nothing truly positive either. Because inside them, a small part feels threatened, as if your advancement has made the distance between them and life even more obvious. But then, there are people you'll remember forever for one simple reaction. They look at you as if you've just won something for all of humanity. They don't ask, what's next? They don't flip the coin to find the downside. They don't analyze whether it was luck or effort. They simply say, that's amazing, you deserve it, and you can feel they mean it. No layer of competition or pretense, no trace of envy or tension in their eyes. Just the full presence of someone secure enough in themselves that they don't need to dim others to feel bright. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "What benefits one part of the community benefits the whole." In Stoic philosophy, success is not a race for position. It is the growth of a part that uplifts the system. When someone achieves something good, a mature character doesn't see a threat, but sees potential that if it happened to them, it might happen to me too. And if it doesn't, that's still fine. Because their worth is not defined by who gets ahead. A person who can congratulate others with sincerity has broken one of the greatest chains of our time, the quiet habit of comparison. They don't see life as a ladder where someone's rise must mean another's fall. They don't define progress by overtaking others, but by remaining still enough to genuinely rejoice when someone else rises. This isn't naivete. It's the strength of one who no longer lives in spiritual scarcity, who understands that it's possible to exist in a world where others are smarter, more beautiful, or more successful without becoming bitter. Such people rarely speak much. They don't need to hug you or shower you with compliments. But when they say, "Congratulations," you can hear joy untainted by envy. You sense a soul that doesn't need to win every conversation. They're not afraid of becoming invisible while the light is on you, because they know light is not a limited resource, it's something that spreads. And today, it shines on you. Tomorrow, it might shine on them. Or on no one at all, and that's okay too. I used to be the kind of person who quietly felt jealous of other people's success. Not because I wanted them to fail, but because I never truly believed there was a place for me in a world full of people moving faster. I smiled. I applauded. I said, "That's great." But deep inside was an uneasy silence, as if I were being left behind. It wasn't until I started focusing on living at the rhythm of my own life that I realized envy doesn't come from others being better. It comes from not knowing where you're going. Since then, I've learned to say congratulations without clenching my teeth, to say I understand without dragging my own experience into it, and to say no without being afraid of being disliked. 6 simple words, but if you live by each of them, you won't need to raise your voice. You'll be respected for the very silence you no longer have to command. If this video has helped you understand more clearly the quiet strength that comes from how you live, not how you perform, then like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos. You don't need to shout to be heard. You just need to live deep enough that you can't be overlooked. See you in the next one.